Hello, this is Oliver Greenfield from the Green Economy Coalition. Today we want to have one of the most important conversations. What is a social contract? Why do we need one? How do you get involved?
Hi, I'm Najma Mohamed from the Green Economy Coalition. Thank you for joining us. Lots of organizations and people across the world are actually beginning to use the term a new social contract. We're hearing diverse voices from the United Nations, World Economic Forum, but also social movements and voices calling for social and climate justice, like the Climate Youth Movement and the movement for Black Lives Matter, asking for a new social contract, one that creates a safe, just and inclusive world for everybody.
We want to explore that term with you. We want to find out what it could mean. We want to find out how we could bring it alive. And we want to make sure this is a participatory, ongoing process of engagement and change.
We'd love you to join us. And we'd love to hear your voices and ideas about what a social contract means to you. And we invite you to join us on our Twitter account at GE Coalition.
Les forces de l'ordre font bloc.
Marched on the city's outskirts.
I think, Oliver, we've just come through as a world a moment that put us all through such difficulties, stretched us to our limits and really put our institutions, our economies and our societies to the test. And it's a test that many across the world feel we've actually failed dismally. We know that we're staring as a society, a climate and environmental crisis in the face. In many parts of the world, this crisis is not going to happen. It is already happening and impacting people's lives.
The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, escalating inequality and persistent poverty, they all come from how we run our economies. And these are huge changes to create, not only our economies, but how do we consume, live, work. We need to change this whole social economic system.
We have probably the biggest challenge we're going to face in our lives, right, Oliver? This is, if we don't find, the solidarity between those that are fighting for decent work, for shelter, for the right to voice, with those that are fighting for climate and environmental justice. I just think that coalition and that solidarity that you described, the moment is now and the time is ripe for us to join together, I think.
We, as a community, have largely understood why we need to change and what we need to change. The key question now for me is, how do we change? And I don't think we have any chance of changing unless we have a democratic mandate, a solidarity for that change. And we need to find a new mechanism to build that critical mass, that social mandate, to challenge our politicians and to encourage our leaders to step forward with more ambition and more action. And so that's, for me, why social contract is really exciting, because it tries to start to imagine this idea of a new solidarity for change, a new clear message for change. And we need to make sure that that comes alive as quickly and as inclusively as possible.
And I think at the heart of this, social contract and asking for a new one is really restoring the essentials of what government should be about. It's trustworthy, transparent, accountable, fighting, corruption and also working for the public good.
And for me, the idea of a social contract is explicitly about saying, and I think you mentioned it before, this is the biggest transition of our lifetimes and potentially ever. In the shortest amount of time. You can't impose this on people. You need to create that democratic mandate for it. You need ownership. You need support. You need support to carry it across electoral cycles, investment cycles. You need behavior change to sustain and to manifest the new system. This can't be imposed on people.
I think some of the strongest voices globally talking about the need for a new social contract has actually been the movement that are fighting for equal rights for women. I mean, we've seen disturbingly after the pandemic that most of the people who will be pushed back into poverty because of the pandemic would be women and young girls. Most of the children who lost out of school and will not go back are young girls. So I do think that women don't even say that the social contract has been broken, has been fractured for them. It's either non-existent or completely broken.
Another thought from my side is that, I've not seen an adequate diagnosis of why we're in the mess we're in. But I largely know that it's predominantly made because of a bunch of decisions made by men. And that's just the truth of who's run the world for the last so many thousands of years. And if we're really going to be serious about transformation, we need more balance. We need more diversity. We need not to focus always on competition and domination and control characteristics that are so very prevalent in men that get to the top of organizations.
I mean, I was thinking about your question about, the barriers to women entering and being part of this, transition process. Is many young women across the world don't have easy access to science and mathematics and engineering. And so they don't get into the sectors where some of the rapid transformations are happening in energy, in transport, in waste management. So we have to address this at multiple levels. And if we're going to look at this transition in a sort of a gender-neutral way, we're going to be reproducing the patterns that we have at the moment, which are unjust to women. I think there's also a part of the social contract that's existed in a broken or fractured form has really not acknowledged the fact that a part of that social contract is our contract with nature, with the natural world, that in some cultures, in some wisdoms across the world, there's a very intricate understanding that we are not over, we are with nature and we are a part of it. So I think more and more we're beginning to realize how fundamental that is to our well-being and our lives and our livelihoods and our jobs, to have a healthy, functioning, flourishing planet. Because for sure, I'm not quite sure the planet needs us, but we need her.
Yeah, you make a kind of quite a deep philosophical point about this is a reimagining of our relationships, not only with each other, but also with nature. And we need to redefine our relationship with nature and ensure that it's not an extractive one, ensure that it's not an abusive one, ensure that it's one of mutual self-interest. And I think that that's also a really powerful opportunity of reimagining what it is to be alive in this moment, not to be colonial, not to be extractive, not to be abusive, but to be genuinely collaborative, cooperative, and imagine a place where we design our economies and societies with those fundamental principles at heart.
I'm sure the question is growing, as it must be in others' minds as well. So what is a social contract? And I think we've started speaking about it, in our conversation. But I think it's both the sort of formal expression of that implicit understanding between the state and the citizens. But I think when we imagine a new social contract that's really fit for the challenges of our time, we have to start thinking about a social contract also drawing on communitarian concepts, that pre-exist the current political systems and structures that we have. But principles like buen vivir that inspired the sort of turn in constitutional development in Ecuador and Bolivia and at the moment in Chile, that's busy putting together an ecological constitution. We see concepts such as eco-swaraj that has taken root in India, and one that's very familiar to me, that of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. Concepts like that are alive, they're known to people, they are in society, and they structure the relationships in society. So I think when we start thinking about a new social contract, we have to think about these formal processes and systems that we have in our society, like our constitutions, like the policies and regulations that shape and help us govern our society, in conjunction with these wisdoms and these concepts that have deep roots within societies and communities.
It's about bringing more and more people into this conversation, recognizing that this is not transition that's led by a few elites. This is a transition that's owned by everybody. It touches everybody's lives. How are we going to make sure social contract is a real citizen participatory process that exists and has power?
I think we've got fantastic examples to share as the Green Economy Coalition. We've been working for the last few years with civil society partners and organizations across the world to get a voice and have a say and a stake in how policies are being designed and implemented at the country level, at the even at the local level. And I think that we need new types of institutions, and we're beginning to see citizens' assemblies. We're beginning to see them happen at a very local city level. We're beginning to see them happen at a global level, transnationally. So I think we do have a case for beginning to try and influence and lobby and advocate for our global institutional landscape to understand the importance of social mandate.
So let's talk about how we bring this social contract into being. For the Green Economy Coalition, we're trying to get governments to set out transition plans. And a transition plan is a valid transition plan unless it has an explicit societal transition participation process, a mandate, an agreement, an engagement process around that plan. So I particularly like the sort of citizens' assembly approach where you get representation across all walks of life, and that becomes a sort of democratic touch point for this transition.
We're facing a moment in time, trust in governments have declined. There's a sense of apathy, voter apathy, people not going to vote and actually understand the power of their vote, and a declining space for civil society to be active and to engage, with citizens. So do you wait until you have, this system where everybody has a voice, everybody has a say, and then that there are these beautiful citizens' assemblies and structures and citizens' proposals not only get heard, but then get put into the plan for the country, which, by the way, was not the case in the French Citizens' Assembly. One of the best processes you need to have, even in that, mature process of citizen engagement, a guarantee that 20% of citizen proposals are going to make it into the final plan. Otherwise, why are we consulted? Why are we asked? Is it a tick box when it's legally mandated? Just like, is our vote meaningful? We don't want citizen engagement to become a tick box exercise.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that it needs to have enough ambition. Look, we know that if you don't have enough ambition on this transition to make it democratic and participatory, we know what happens. We see, as you mentioned, the French. Well, that was a response to the Gilets jaunes, where they didn't consult at all. You know, that had already blown up in their faces. We see, and the best one that I see is the German youth taking the government to court because the German climate bill was putting too much emphasis on future generations and was therefore deemed unconstitutional.
You know, the same way that we need politicians to step up, we need citizens to step up and step out of the sort of comfort zone, step out of the apathy that most are still, not voting, not going, becoming active in our communities and our neighborhoods, in our workplaces. As you said at one point, Oliver, all of us have a part to play in making that choice.
I agree. I think it's a really important point. We're not just trying to beat up governments here. We're not trying to beat up business leaders and other. We're trying to say there is a moment where we look each other in the eye and we say we are committed to this transition together. So Najma, this is about a socio-economic reform. The biggest, most powerful actors in that space are arguably business. What role for business? What role expectations of business? How do we make sure that their power and energy and enthusiasm is also brought to this?
I do think, unfortunately, in some places, business has more power than governments. And so I do think that businesses should be held to account. Government should be in a position to make sure that businesses comply with a regulatory framework, that they also engage citizens and workers and communities. And I do think that the days of painting business, with the same brush is over, because we are seeing really progressive, really forward-looking, transformative actions, by business willing to work with governments and citizens and civil society groups to structure new forms of relationships, new investments, new operations that actually are good.
Yeah, look, I would agree with you. We're seeing tremendous leadership within the business community. However, how much of the community is that? Does it represent the majority or is it the minority? And we all know that we do need leadership, but is the majority going to move unless the rules change? And I think that the challenge I've always had in the work I've done with business is that you can always tell a good story of progressive leadership, but largely there's a very hidden majority that are still dragging us into the old system and the old ways. And we all know the stat of the biggest constituency at COP26 was the oil and gas sector, bigger than any government.
I think largely our mechanisms for accountability and transparency has failed, both when we deal with business and when we deal with governments. And I do think we've got to look at the systems of transparency and accountability in both those holders of power, but those holders of responsibility. At the heart of the crisis we're facing is a crisis brought about by particular choices, particularly a design of economies and businesses that benefited the few at the expense of the majority. And I do think when we think about cost, yes, the fossil fuel workers that you spoke about are going to bear the cost. The precarious workers are going to bear the cost. And we cannot expect that the cost has to be borne by the most vulnerable. There's an elephant in the room that's often not spoken about, and that is the long-lasting and enduring impacts of colonialism.
We know local wisdom, local knowledge should play a much stronger role in this, and yet often Indigenous communities are excluded from processes, or their wisdom and knowledge is lost or ignored by a dominant economic system. So again, as a marginalized community, how are we going to make explicit that we bring the best of diversity, the best of wisdom and knowledge into this process?
I remember having a conversation with a young woman who's leader of an Indigenous group. And her words have actually stayed with me and haunted me, since the moment I've spoken to her. I've never forgotten her words. And she said to me, we are basically just fighting to be recognized as human beings. We have a love for our land. We feel we can manage our ancestral land in a much better, more sustainable way. But first, we just need to be recognized as human beings.
It's fair to say that racial injustice is still very prevalent, and that here is an opportunity where we are redefining social economic systems. Surely it needs to be addressing the structural inequalities of racism much more explicitly. And how do we do that?
So I think that this is such a key moment to actually come together to address, the kind of social, climate and environmental injustices that seem to be impacting the most marginal, most vulnerable, most at risk in our societies and communities. And obviously this is something I particularly can relate to. I mean, South Africa is a bit of a extreme example of seeing how people of color have been impacted, and how they live in the worst places, breathe the worst air, drink the worst water, have the worst jobs. But sadly, it's not confined, to South Africa. I'm living in the UK at the moment, and I know that there are cases in the UK that showed that people of color have, gone through this pandemic, gone through this moment of intense vulnerability, and in a very difficult way to other groups in this country, where I expected to experience, something different, but didn't.
Yeah, look, sometimes we can be overburdened with all the challenges of the world, or we can see that this moment of economic transformation is a necessity, but also an extraordinary opportunity of reimagining how we can unpick some of these injustices, and to ensure that everybody's got a decent stake, a decent opportunity, and a decent opportunity to live well, to contribute, to fulfill their own potentials.
And we know we're not there now.
No.
And we know that for many people, we've not been there for the longest time. And I do think, I was thinking, of this, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And if someone had told me when I was a young person in South Africa that I'd be at university and I'd vote for the first time, I would not have believed it. I would not, because the systems around me seemed so entrenched and so immovable, and unchangeable. And yet we have lots of challenges, almost 30 years on after, but we would never go back.
In the short term, there is no cost comparable to the loss of future. And that is the biggest business case. And that's one of the reasons that another subject we should probably touch on is the importance of youth in this conversation.
We're seeing young people show us what it means to be active, caring, engaged citizens. Young people are taking their governments to court in Peru, in Germany, in New Zealand. We're seeing it in different parts of the world. We're seeing young people come together, build alliances, across geographies, across different places, with this common agenda that if we don't get things right, they are going to be bearing the cost. They're going to have to live in a world that's uninhabitable.
But I don't know whether, I'm inspired by those movements, the youth movements and the legal cases, but I don't know whether that's a sign of success. I think that's a sign of failure, a democratic failure. We should not be putting this emphasis on young people to have to take their political class to court. That's just an indicator of failure in my eyes. Rather than let's create constructive opportunities to engage citizens, including youth, in the description and creation of this new system. If I was a young person, I don't just want a job, I want a career. Where are the sectors that are going to grow? Where are the careers that I can commit my intellect and my energies to for my lifetime? Not just a job where I'm intransient from one place to another. That's what we should be delivering. That's where we should be having the conversations. Let's describe an economic system that delivers those choices rather than requires them to take their parliamentarians to court. So we've had a fabulous conversation about social contract. It's a very big subject. If you agree with us that trust, solidarity, collaboration, cooperation are the essential components that will deliver successful transition, then we need to actively pursue how we deliver those. Let's be explicit about those who are impacted. Let's be explicit about those that are excluded. Let's try and make this representative. Let's try and create that critical mass or that democratic mandate that drives this transition quicker, faster, fairer. We really want to do this work. We can't do it alone. It has to be a unique partnership between the inequality movement, the environment movement, and all others that want to have a role in bringing to life this new system. We need collaboration, we need partnership, and it has to be both global, regional, national. We need to make sure this is driving change in countries. We also need to learn from each other to accelerate, to find how we find a common language of this that supports this solidarity and this transition. There's a lot of work to be done.
It's been a real pleasure sharing with you our initial thinking, ideas on what a social contract is, why we need it, and how we can possibly get there. And so we really invite you to join us as we explore, as we interact with those who are at the forefront of holding the governments to account, of reimagining new ways, new social contracts, new ways of reinvigorating democracy and governance in this critical moment. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, hear if you've got really promising examples of a new social contract in action. So visit our website at greeneconomycoalition.org or drop us a line on our Twitter account at GE Coalition. Thank you. It's been wonderful having you along on this conversation.